that's one of the problems as well, is that in the UK, once an FOI has been put in, it's illegal to delete a record once the FOI has been in relation to that record. In Ireland, I think the only legislative procedure is the National Archives Act that's against deleting information. But I've sought information that I've been told has been destroyed, and there's no recourse for me in that situation. So I was seeking the diary of the Minister for Enterprise for 1999, and I was told no, it was destroyed. And I'm like, well, what to do in that situation? I mean, it's a strange situation. And the same applies to emails, where emails are just deleted, and you're like, well, it's frustrating, because I believe there should be some legal protection for the activities of a minister when they were carrying out their duties has been destroyed, and I'm like, well, what system is there for me to recourse, and there's none.
There's an obligation to keep records for 6 years.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. There are obligations under, as Gavin said, under the Archives Act to maintain records for certain periods. But as regards FOI is about access to records that exist on the day of the request. Now the difficulty is, how do we know, how does anybody know, if somebody had an email that perhaps they might be sensitive about releasing, that they destroyed when the request was received? We simply can't tell. That's the difficulty.
Thank you, Julian. We have a question from Lee, and then further down back in there. Lee, please.
Lee, there's a debate in the UK amongst historians about what the effect of freedom of information is on the ability of participants to judge actions by public servants and civil servants. And one of the key arguments that's made against freedom of information is the idea that rather than, as it was in the past, whereby civil servants could make decisions and they would be judged by history after the 30-year rule elapsed, now they actually are faced with the prospect of decisions that they're making being in public domain almost instantaneously. And an argument is made that as a result, they are less likely to record those decisions and less likely to conduct business in a manner which would be subject to a Freedom of Information Act. I'm just wondering, how credible is that idea that civil servants would sort of issue instructions to inferiors off the record, or would generally do those things in that sort of way to avoid Freedom of Information Act?
Well, if I don't take that. I hear it anecdotally all the time that civil servants don't record what they do, and they're less frank and candid with the advice that they give. However, I would have to say, on the basis of records that have come across my desk, I see no evidence. But I don't know what the position is, because as I said in my opening remarks, only 3 to 4% of refusals are appealed to us, so we only see that small snapshot of what happens, so we simply have no idea what happens in the rest of 96-97% of cases. But I would have to say, on the basis of the evidence that I have seen, I would see no basis for making that conclusion. But like I said, that's based on a 3% sample.
This came up as well when the 2003 Act came in, the amendment. Originally, cabinet records were due to be released 5 years after the Act was activated in 1998. And after 5 years had passed in 2003, the government decided we're going to add 5 years to that limit. So that records became available in 2008. And I'm going through this process at the moment of trying to obtain a lot of these records from 12 years ago, 11 years ago, and 10 years ago, that are still relevant today. I mean, a lot of the same people who are in power now were in power back then. The effect it has, I mean, there was a recent decision in the UK around Michael Heseltine's resignation from the UK government in 1986. And the argument came up I think it was in the Information Tribunal in the UK, and they were saying, well, if this information is released now, the Cabinet isn't going to be able to have a frank and honest discussion around this issue because there'll be records created. But the judge kind of, I think it was the Information Tribunal or the High Court, basically said, well, enough time has passed, and at this stage, this is 25 years later, and enough memoirs had been written by the people who were in the room at the time that said, well, we kind of have a good idea what happened, so we'll release the record. And those records will come out, I think, in a few weeks' time. I think in relation to civil servants not, or maybe recording information, I think to a point, yes. But generally, there's so much information anyway. It's vast amounts of information. And if you look at one simple comparison, cabinet agendas, just what's discussed at cabinet level in Ireland, you don't find out until 10 years later. In Russia, you find out the week before. In Slovenia, you find out the week before. In Germany, you find out the day before. In Latvia, you find out a week before. We have to wait 10 years to find out what just was being discussed. Not even the content of the discussion, but just what was. And I think it's that level of secrecy is what is kind of the counterbalance to the argument about public servants' decision making.
I'd just like to pick that up just for a second. There is the countervailing anecdotal argument that freedom of information forces better record keeping. If you know that it's going to be seen, then you're going to ensure that it's in better order. And one of the great horrors of the extension of the freedom of information regime to the third level was that it forced scatty academics like me, in fact, to tidy up their files. And after your first FOI compliance, your files get a lot tidier very, very quickly. Historians complain about the mess in which information is available in the National Archives, that the files are a mess, more often than not. So the countervailing argument is FOI at least forces the files to be tidier, more accessible, and more comprehensible. There is also the argument, I think, that although at the start less is being written down, over time civil service mandarins become less paranoid and government goes on as normal. So I think that argument could be overstated. I mean, politically I would agree it's likely that less is being written down, but when you look at it over time, that doesn't tend to hold up.
Thank you, Lee. Just before we go to the next question, can I ask for a show of hands amongst the room who has seriously considered submitting an FOI request? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And how many people have actually submitted an FOI request? 3. And I missed those 2 hands earlier on. So it's about 3 out of 8 of us. Okay, very good. Was there a question from yourself earlier on?
Well, yeah, it was based towards the entire table.
You wouldn't tell us your first name, please? Oh, sure, thanks.
You stated that earlier, Gavin, in the UK, the website that allowed the flow of requests to govern quite easily. Are there any other cases in other countries that allow groups, people who wish to have information made that they could contribute en masse so to reduce the cost?
Do you mean in terms of publishing the documents online?
Or requested as in either through a charity or through an organisation?
I'm not aware of any. My society, which is the charity that funded What Do They Know, is known for building these kind of applications first and then them being replicated internationally. So basically they make an API available and people just take the software and implement it in their own country. It would be actually, I've been considering with friends of mine doing it here, but not in relation to FOI, but instead doing it in relation to the environmental legislation, because that covers almost all the public bodies in the country, including arguably Anglo-Irish Bank and NAMA. That's just, I'm going through an argument with Sean's office about this at the moment.
Very good. Thank you very much, Sean.
Not at your side today.
Sean, John?
No.
Cool. We have a question first from Elaine, then over here, and then over here. Elaine, please.
Yeah, can I ask any of the panel to have a view on where the line is to be drawn between FOI and data protection? For example, should individual public servants or people who aren't elected to office have a right to expect, say that their salaries, expenses won't be published unless such information is anonymised?
Well, from our perspective, there's a provision in, I understand in data protection, certainly in FOI, that provides that if you can get the information you seek through FOI, then you're not precluded. Data protection doesn't preclude it. So we take, for example, in particular, any output by a civil servant, albeit any receipt of expenses claims and so on, is not that person's personal information and therefore would fall for release. And we routinely fine for that. In fairness to public bodies, I think that so few of those issues come to us now that my understanding would be that that type of information is routinely released. But if certainly any time it has come to us, we have found for release.
Thank you very much, Elaine.
Angela, no, and it's really for everybody on the panel, and it's the issue of redaction, and perhaps it's just sort of explaining how that actually works in practice. But I've actually seen some documents, I think they were HSC, where the only thing that wasn't redacted was and the, and a comma. It was just ludicrous. And it took, it was like getting blood out of the stone to get them. And is it specified under the legislation or under practice how much can be redacted? So obviously what I'm thinking is you release a document, but there's really nothing on it anyway. So you've actually, done the
Yeah.
spirit of the, not the spirit, but the letter of the law.
There is a provision that says that if information is redacted from the record, if what is left would be misleading, then the whole thing should be exempted. Now, the Commissioner has taken the view that if, as a sort of a development of that if what is left would be meaningless, the comments, the that and the ands, then you would just, she would find that a decision to exempt the whole record would be justified. But as a judgment call to be made as to whether you can only have, for example, you could have 4 or 5 words in a page, they could be significant. So it depends on the context. But there is a provision, yes, to cover that type of thing.
I'm often puzzled by redactions myself. Oftentimes I'm puzzled because I think in one instance I knew the person, so I saw an FOI request log. In other words, I wanted to see what everybody had been asking for from the department over 3 years. And I knew one of the people who had asked for some information that was not personal. And their name had been redacted. And I was like, well, why did they redact their name but not my name from my own request? Because I was looking through the same log. They're called, you could call them meta FOIs, where you're just looking for FOIs, or you're FOIing FOIs. And the same is true of...
They're fleas on fleas, isn't it?
Fleas on fleas, exactly.
Bigger ones. Bigger ones.
But not FOI squared, no?
But even the idea that when you're FOIing FOIs, this is kind of a similar idea. Some departments don't keep copies of what they issue. So if I ask for somebody else's FOI, I'll say, can I have that? And they'll say, no, we have to go through the whole process again to get the same information. And you're like, well, surely it'd make more sense just to keep a copy. And they don't. Some don't, some do.
I think Gillian wants to come back there.
Just to follow up on that, what you're saying about departments not keeping copies of what they're attributing out. Are they not obliged if they've already given it to somebody that the person asked for it and it's already been released, so therefore you should already...
I think the information therein has been released, but as for the actual public document that was compiled into a release, I think Sean can probably...
Yeah, just for example, obviously they would have no basis for seeking to exempt information that they had previously released, but there is nothing in the Act that requires a public body to retain what it has released. So you do have this issue, and you do have this issue of inconsistency across public bodies, where some of them retain, some of them don't. So.
Thanks for that. If I could go... Maureen, is it?
Yes.
Great, thanks, Maureen.
I'm just wondering if the High Court has stated that they think the exemption should be narrowly interpreted, why do so many cases filter through your office and then through to the High Court?
Well, I would say one big reason is the expense for the High Court.
Because you have to come up.
My learned friends are not cheap, unfortunately.
Sorry, just for the purpose of recording, I missed the question. Sorry.
Okay. If the High Court has said that these exemptions should be narrowly drawn, why are so few cases going through? And even to you, 3%?
It's roughly 3 to 4%, yeah.
Gillian.
Yeah, well, in our annual report, we report at 2 levels. We report on our own activity, and we report on what the outcome and reviews coming to us are. We also report on summary basis on what has happened in the public sector and all public bodies generally. So yes, we do publish those statistics. Yes.
Thanks, Sean. This gentleman here.
Maliki, my name. Just on the inconsistencies, which departments are more inconsistent than the others, are more difficult than the others?
Name and shame.
Obviously my figures will be skewed because I concentrate on particular issues sometimes, especially the bank guarantee scheme and Anglo-Irish Bank. Finance I've found particularly difficult over the last 12 months. Sometimes it actually depends on the personality of the person you're dealing with. FOS is really good. I mean, the ref officer I have a great relationship with. The Department of the Taoiseach is usually very good. Most bodies are actually reasonably good. It's just that occasionally you'll come across somebody who either doesn't like what you're doing or takes an issue with the information you're looking for, and doesn't necessarily put barriers in your way, but sometimes there's a personality conflict, sometimes it's really that basic. It's kind of, and some departments will, I think, deliberately do things to make your life difficult, like sending you paper when you ask for stuff that's clearly digital. I mean, I'll never understand it. I mean, I think it's partly to do with just that's the way we've always done it, and we're not going to change, but also that when you're redacting digital documents as opposed to physical ones, it's a little bit more of a technical process to do it, and they're afraid that information that's redacted might appear as unredacted.